I had mentioned before in a previous video how Toedscool, a new Pokemon introduced in Generation 9, which looks very similar to Tentacool, has gotten a significant upgrade in comparison to its old-gen counterpart. What was also introduced in Generation 9 is the new Pokemon Wiglett, which is a counterpart to the old Pokemon Diglett. And in this video, I want to go over why is Wiglett kind of bad? Because if we look at the viability rankings, we can see that Diglett and Toedscool are both in A+ tier. Very, very solid. And then keep on going down. Not in D rank, not in C rank, not in anything above that. So why is it that Toedscool had such a very large increase compared to Tentacool, whereas Wiglett is really suffering? Well, let's go over. This is a Life Orb set that I have. It's not exactly the one that you're gonna run all the time, but it's just an example of what it can do. It's got a pretty good move pool. It's got Aqua Jet as pretty good priority. Even though you're at 20 speed, you still like having priority moves so that way you can hit Scarfers or the Pokemon that also have priority moves. You have stuff like Sucker Punch. Diglett also gets that, but it's still really nice to have nonetheless. You also have a lot more special coverage. You have Ice Beam and Earth Power. That's really good, because what Diglett has a bit of a hard time dealing with is it doesn't even just get Sludge Bomb. It does. You can use Sludge Bomb on Diglett, but it's a lot easier to spam Ice Beam when it's just a much better stab option, especially because something like Toedscool, which could take the Sludge Bomb really well, dies to the Ice Beam. Something like that. But then you also have Earth Power if you want to. You can also run Stomping Tantrum. But you also have a whole bunch of other stuff. You have Throat Chop if you want to have regular Dark Stab that doesn't depend on your opponent. You have Memento, which can be really useful in setting up setup sweepers in the back. You have Hydro Pump as a really good stab option, even though your special attack isn't all that great. You have Blizzard if you want to run that. Like, you have a lot of options. You also have Bulldoze, Final Gambit, some more niche things there, but they're worth mentioning. You also have Rain Dance, and that'll become relevant later. But the important part is, like, you do have a good move pool, but that's sort of where everything ends. If we look at the stat line, 10 HP, 55 attack, 25 defense, 35 special attack, 25 special defense, and 95 speed. And that sounds wonderful on paper, until you realize that for whatever reason, Diglett has 20 more, and they just removed it? It's got 245, and that just ruins it, because at least, like, one of the things that makes Diglett so annoying to deal with is that you can really feasibly run an Eviolite set, and it's actually really hard to take down on the special side because despite the fact it's got lackluster HP, its special defense that's actually really good. So not having that's really awkward, and just giving it 20 points in anywhere else would make it already so much better. Add it into attack, then it becomes a really good, not necessarily a side option, but at least it has a specified niche then. Because if you have 75 attack, and then you have this low HP, well then you can be pretty reasonably a pretty nice Life Orb user, as well as a Revenge Killer because of your base 20 speed, and you still have Aqua Jet, all these other options that you can still run. But then you at least have that niche there of just like, oh, well I could go with Diglett, and although it's really fast on the bulkier side, I also have Wiglett, which is even faster and even, well, not faster, but it's more offensively oriented. And even if you give it into special attack, then it becomes this really interesting mix attacker that has both the same amount of attack, same amount of special attack, and you can reasonably run this set, and it'd be really nice, because this is like, oh, well, what do I have to expect? Do I expect to have water moves coming into my face, because, you know, Aqua Jet, and it also has Liquidation, it's got Stomping Tantrum, it's got all this stuff, but then it can also run, you know, a special set with Ice Beam, Earth Power, Hydro Pump, and then if it wants to, it can also run Memento in the final slot, and those are all really good ideas, but they just give it to that either. And then also what would have been interesting is if you gave it into speed, and the reason why that's important is because you reach up to 20 naturally, and that seems pretty fine, and it's still really good, but if you had even faster than that, then it'd be actually a really good option at forcing out Diglett, funnily enough, as well as kind of slow Scarfers. If you have 20 more in this speed stat, that means that you get up to 22, which would be really interesting because that means that 14 speed Scarfers wouldn't be able to do their jobs as well, in addition to you being able to speed tie 22 Scarfers. For example, of 22 Scarf, we have Magnemite. It likes running Choice Scarf. It'll get up to 15 speed. But it's just really good as an option. Also, Gothita, that would actually really be nice. So, Gothita has its niche because of Shadow Tag. And on this Scarf set, it only gets up to 14 speed. So if you have Wiglet and it gets up to 22, it doesn't, so it's bad. But if it even had that, you would be able to outspeed Gothita, and then even if it tries to come in and revenge kill, or just remove one of your pieces like a Cabrawler or something, then what you could do is that even if it kills the Cabrawler, you can come in on the Gothita, have it run Throat Chop, and then you would still have a threatening option for the Gothita, force them to use up their Terra, force them to do something else. And it would just be so annoying to deal with. It'd be actually a really interesting mon that would probably have some sort of niche, but it doesn't because they just got rid of the 20 stat points for whatever reason. So there's that. What made Toedscool so good in comparison to Tentacool was going from water to ground, which is kind of interesting because then we have a ground-type Pokemon going into water. But what also made it really valuable was it didn't lose any of the base stats. It was the exact same all across the board. It still had 40 HP, 40 attack, 35 defense, 50 special attack, 100 special defense, and 70 speed. Same thing on both mons. That was always really nice. It also had a really nice ability as an addition. So on Tentacool, you could kind of run Clear Body, which would be kind of nice versus webs, because then you can come in, you're not fettered by them, and then you can spin. You also have Liquid Ooze or Rain Dish, and those aren't terribly valuable. Like, very often you would get niche use out of it, if anything. Now, with Toedscool, Mycelium Might, although it's a bit bad because it's your Pokemon status moves go last in their priority bracket and ignore abilities. So it's just a straight-up worse Mold Breaker. So if you're wondering what Mold Breaker does, I'll just go to XU for this. But Mold Breaker, this Pokemon's moves and their effects ignore the abilities of other Pokemon, which is just straight up better. And I'm assuming that they use Mycelium Might as a way to not just have these really dumb spores that are just really fast and would break things, but it at least had an ability that is usable, but not broken. The previous ability that Diglett has is Arena Trap, which prevents your opponent from choosing to switch out unless they are airborne, which, for example, would really easily trap Tentacool and kill it, and there's no counterplay to it. And that's a really good ability. Some are considering it broken, which I can understand why. I'm not sure if I agree with that yet. I have to be more thinking about it. But the important bit is this is an exceedingly a valuable ability to have that basically defines how good Diglett is. And then we look at Wiglet, and all it has is really Gooey as its ability. And Gooey's not bad. Pokemon making contact with this Pokemon have their speed lowered by 1 stage. So that means that, for example, if Toedscool comes in and it rapid spins, and then you have this come in, then that would mean that Toedscool would get its speed boost from rapid spin, then because of Gooey lose it, and that means that you're still faster than it, which is pretty nice. It means that physical Pokemon can't use like Trailblaze or whatever set up in your face. But it's significantly less useful than what you have with Diglett, with Arena Trap. It's just so valuable being able to pick and choose what in your opponent's team you don't have to deal with the rest of the game. If you don't want to deal with a Pawniard, well then I can just run Terra-type, Dark, and then I take Sucker Punch as well, and then I kill it with Earthquake, and then I can also scout out if it's going to be Terra Flying with Protect. I have options. Wiglet, it just doesn't have that, so it's unfortunate. And the most unfortunate part is that there's actually quite a bit of competition for this like very fast attacker slot. You have Choodle, and the reason why Choodle's good is because it recently got Shell Smash, and Shell Smash is perhaps the best boosting move in the game. It boosts your attack, special attack, and speed by 2, and it lowers your defenses by 1. But the important part here is that it's just it's so good. Why would you ever want to use the very frail, not very great mon of Wiglet as a water attacker when you have Choodle, which can do it significantly better with Liquidation, Crunch, and Ice Fang, and then if you want to, you can Terra-type Dark, Strong Jaw, and then you just have this absurdly powerful Crunch that just breaks through a lot of the tier. And then also, in addition to that, you resist Sucker Punch, you don't have to worry about that kind of priority stuff. It's so absurd how good this is when it gets going. The obvious issue is that it's still a setup sweeper, so it's got limited defensive utility over the course of the game. So, that's still bad. However, it's still significantly better than Wiglet because you still can use this pretty reliably as a win con, and that's really nice. Next up, I have Buizel here, but also just insert any of the rain sweepers. If you want to run a sweeper that's a water type, run Buizel, you can run Psyduck, you can run those guys instead, and they're going to be significantly better. Buizel is important because you can also run it outside of rain. So if I wanted to, I could do an Eviolite set and then do Rain Dance here. And then I can pretty viably run this on a balanced team. It still has defensive utility because of the Eviolite. It's not paper thin when it comes to its defenses. I mean, it's not great, but you can still take some attacks. You threaten really hard with Wave Crash, even outside of rain. You can do Terra-type Water Wave Crash for annoying your opponent. You can also do, like, if you wanted to, instead of Brick Break, you can run Aqua Jet. That kind of stuff. You still have defensive utility, even though this is a very offensively oriented Mon. And that's really cool. So why would you ever want to use Wiglet when you could just use Weasel instead? If you want to have a better 20-speed Life Orb attacker, because that's, you know, that's a pretty important niche. So if we look at it, its HP stat, it only gets up to 18 with a little bit of investment, and that means that you have a really nice Life Orb interaction where your attacks do 1.3 times damage, and you lose 1/10 of your max HP after the attack, but because of how low your HP is, and because Pokemon likes rounding down, instead of dealing 2 HP, it does 1, and that gives us a really nice niche, right? Not really, and that's because you also have Voltorb. Voltorb has better GUI in Static. Obviously, it's not a constant if your opponent has... It's a 30% chance to make your opponent's Pokemon paralyzed, and Paralysis halves their speed and gives them a 25% chance to not move, which is really good. But over the course of the game, just having that and have it be permanent is significantly better than just, oh, well, my opponent used U-turn, and they got a -1 speed boost, and now they're out of the game, so what am I supposed to do? Well, if it gets static, then that's permanent staying on for the rest of the game, unless it's like Natural Cure or something. But it's significantly more impactful to have your opponent's speed halved for the entirety of the game, as opposed to just having a small increase at, like, one interaction. You also still have, like, some really good unique options. You have Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, Terra Blast, typically Terra Blast Ice. You can also do Terra Blast Bug for the express purpose of beating over Girafarig in addition to Toedscool. And then you also have Taunt, so that means that even though your opponent may want to set up Hazard with something like Limit, well, it's fine, because you can just do that, and then no rocks up. Obviously, you have to be a bit wary because this is Life Orb and you're not the bulkiest, but even then, you still have really good bulk. 40 HP, 50 defense, 55 special defense. That's pretty good. And even if you wanted to, you don't have to run Life Orb. I've never seen that happen before. But if you wanted to, you can also run Eviolite, and then you're still a really good fast special sweeper, but now you can take hits significantly better, and you can do both roles if you wanted to, of a fast, specially offensive attacker that can be really hard to hit. Especially because you have Volt Switch, so if your opponent doesn't have a ground type, you just go all crazy. And even if they do, you can Terra-type Ice. Now, obviously, Wiglets would have a bit of a niche here because it's like, oh, well, I don't have to worry about Terra in order to have my coverage moves, because Wiglet, it has Ice Beam, it's got Sucker Punch. Like, it still has utility there, but it's significantly harder to justify when its defenses are significantly worse. Its attacking stat isn't great, and overall, Voltorb has more impactful moves in neutral matchups, and by that I mean you have Volt Switch, so it's kind of one of the best moves in the game, and the reason for that is if I'm versing a Deerling here, and I'll get into why Deerling is sort of a replacement for Wiglet in a sec, but if I'm facing a Deerling here, then what I can always do with my Voltorb is Volt Switch out, so that way I can safely go into something else and deal damage to this Deerling at the same time. And the reason why that's important is your opponent could do something very easily of just like, oh, well, I see that there's a Voltorb on the field, and I have a Deerling out myself, so in order to catch whatever is going to beat the Deerling, which could be, for example, a Marionee, just so that way it can take some hits, pivot out to something else, or it can go to Glimmet, and then it's like, oh, well, then they're going to go and do that. Then what I can do in revenge is that I can go to, like, my Girafarig, I could go to my Diglett, I could go to something that would threaten the Deerling that's currently being faced. I was like, oh, well, I can just, you know, Volt Switch out instead, and then you eliminate the entire interaction. And the reason for that is even if your opponent goes from like, oh, well, I have my Deerling out, I'm scared that my opponent's going to do Terra Blast Ice and then do a lot of damage, so in order to take that really well, I'm going to go into my Magnemite and it'll be a-okay. Well, I can just Volt Switch out of there, not have to deal with Magnemite, and then go into a positive matchup versus this Magnemite, and that's why you really like Volt Switch. And as such, Wiglet doesn't do anywhere near as much as you want Voltorb. Like, Voltorb is significantly better as a result of having Volt Switch and having the ability to not be in bad matchups as easily. And even if there is a bad matchup that isn't a ground type, then you can just Volt Switch out, it's all A-okay. Next up, we have the Dark Souls protagonist, the Alaskan Bullworm Nimble. The reason why it's really important is because one of the niches that we could have is like, oh, well, it's got 20 base speed. Well, 20 speed at level 5 if you go max speed. So like that. And that's pretty valuable. But one of the issues there is that you're limited by your speed. The niche that Nimble fulfills is that you have First Impression, which is a priority move, but it's not based upon speed. It's +2 priority, which means that you out-priority stuff like Sucker Punch. And that's extremely valuable because even though you may be slower than a Scarfer, you can still hit them first. So, for example, if I wanted to have a Girafarig, and let's just go Physical Attacker, and then I just replace Body Slam with Trailblaze. Something like that. Then the issue there is that if I have a Voltorb, it's got the same base speed, it won't outspeed Girafarig after the boost, and Girafarig can just hit it with an Earthquake, and it's all A-okay. However, Nimble can just surpass that, use First Impression. It's whatever. You actually have a really good matchup there. And obviously, Girafarig can still run Protect, but that means that Girafarig has to give up on something. It's a lot better as a result. And even going back to the Weasel example, it's got Swift Wind, which means that the Pokemon's speed is doubled in rain, and it's really hard for things like Voltorb or Diglett in order to outspeed it and actually be able to do damage without having to take a hit first. So Nimble has this really nice niche because it's not based upon speed, it's based upon priority. Now still, it's a bit unreliable because First Impression only works on your first turn out. However, it has a really nice niche as a result. So why ever use Wiglet as a revenge killer when Nimble can do it significantly better and it can still hold Life Orb to be really dangerous. Next up we have Deerling, and the reason why I have this here is because if you want to be able to spread paralysis, but you don't want to use Voltorb because it can get trapped by Diglett, then why not use Deerling instead? You can run Thunder Wave on baseline, you have Headbutt so that way you can flinch down your targets. If you want to, you can also run Body Slam, which has a 60% chance to paralyze the target because of the ability Serene Grace, which doubles secondary effect chances. And plus, if you're using Body Slam, you can still hit your opponent pretty hard with your not insignificant base 60 attack stat, as well as having Stab Body Slam, and it can be exceedingly dangerous to deal with as a result. It's a wonderful support Pokemon, and because the paralysis lasts even after you switch out, it means that it's a lot more impactful over the course of the game. So instead of having to only have the GUI the GUI speed decrease once, then you have it over the course of the game. Also, important interaction that I should definitely mention is that Pawniard is really good in current meta, regardless if Terra is there or not. And one of the biggest reasons is that it has Defiant, which this Pokemon's attack is raised by 2 for each of its stats that is lowered by a foe. And the reason why that's super important is because GUI is a stat drop, so Pawniard could reasonably just hit your... Oh boy, it could hit your Wiglet, get the speed decrease, and then get a Swords Dance boost, and you'd much rather have a Static from Voltorb or a Thunder Wave or Body Slam from Deerling instead, because then it doesn't get the boost and you still have the speed decrease on the Pawniard. It can be really annoying to deal with. That's the competition, but let's say I still want to use Wiglet anyway because I think it's a cool mon, it's got a cool nice little niche because of its good speed, and it's got some nice coverage options. Well, the issue is that you don't have enough power to really break over stuff. You're not good enough is the issue. Mr. Krabs here can really easily just come in. It's not going to take too much damage because of how good its defenses are, especially combined with Eviolite. It can possibly bulk up if you're using a physical set. It also has Thunder Punch to threaten you really well, and then if you're like, oh, we'll get some chip damage on it, well, it can just Drain Punch back to full, and it's all okay, so what are you going to do there? Marion Knee is much better because, well, A, it's competition for a Water-type Pokemon. Like, why would you want to run Wiglet when you have a much more defensive Marion Knee here? But you have Surf Recover, Sludge Bomb, Toxic Spikes. Toxic Spikes is a really big one because it gives you a lot of support throughout the course of the game and forces your opponent into some tough spots if they don't want to have certain mons be poisoned, so there's that. Now, obviously, it's not meant to be like an attacker of sorts, but it's really hard to break over as a result, because even if you have, you know, Earth Power or Stomping Tantrum as coverage, Marionee's got some stupidly high bulk. In addition, it can just Sludge Bomb you once, and then you lose a lot of HP, because they got rid of your special defense, which is frankly bizarre. I don't know why they did that. So there's that. Next up we have Fungus. It's slowly on the rise because of how good its typing is, especially because it can just deal with Toedscool. But the big thing to note is that you have to use non-stab Ice-type moves in order to hit Fungus, and that can be really, really hard to deal with because your special attack is comparatively much worse to your physical attack. At least with Marionee, if you use Stomping Tantrum, you're hitting on a base 50. You have base 55 attack, and that'll be a good chunk. But Fungus is a lot harder to deal with because you only have base 35 special attack. So there's that. It also threatens Spore. It can also Giga Drain into you, so even if you get progress and be like, oh, well, I'll chip it down, well, it can just gain it all back. Plus, it's got Synthesis and Regenerator, just heal off the damage that you would do anyway, so that's really annoying. Special note of Magnemite, just because it gets outsped by a lot of Scarfers, and it's not awful because the 20 base speed outspeeds non-Scarfers, but Scarfers are really hard for you to deal with, especially Magnemite, when if you don't have a ground in the back, it can just Volt Switch with impunity, kill you, and go into something in the back, which can be really annoying. It's also got some Terra-type shenanigans it can do there as well, so that's nice. Oh, speaking of Terra-type, just a quick interaction with Marionee. It likes running Terra-type Water because you preserve your defensive utility while also not having a Ground-type weakness. So even if you go for Stomping Tantrum, then Marionee can just kill you, because your Stomping Tantrum is not going to do too much if it's not a super effective hit. I'm mentioning Mankey as well because it's just significantly faster as a Scarfer. It's not like a slower Scarfer. Like Magnemite, for example, it only gets up to 15 speed at level 5, whereas Mankey gets up to 17 speed at level 5, which is significantly more important because it outspeeds even like a lot of stuff, even with a minus speed. For example, it'll outspeed Marionee, it'll tie Brawler, and that could be really annoying that even if you have your GUI off, like you actually make it so that way Mankey gets a bit slower, it can still be hard to answer because it's so fast. Also because it has the ability Defiant, so if, once again, like with the Poniard interaction, it just gets a +2 to attack, and that can be really hard to deal with. Also, final mention is worthwhile because you have David Hasselhoff here, and it kind of does everything that Wiglet kind of wants to do, but exceptionally better for a few reasons. First, David has Roost, which you have consistent healing, which means that you can keep on coming back throughout the course of the game, and you still have defensive utility. Because of Wiglet's lack of any sort of bulk, it'll just die to most things. And one of the things that makes Diglett good, its previous counterpart, is it can come in on electric-type attacks because it's a ground-type Pokemon. So there you go. You also have Rapid Spin to boost your speed, so even though you don't have a very high natural speed in the first place, you can just patch up that issue just fine. So it's whatever. Then you have Liquidation as a pretty nice attack, so that way you it's still really good because you have a higher base attack and it's going to be stab. So that's all nice. You have Brave Bird. You also can do Aqua Cutter if you're worried about your opponent having a setup sweeper. You have Encore, which allows you to win matchups that you really shouldn't. It's also really nice because you get to annoy Girafarig, which is really funny, because like they nasty plot thinking that, oh, well, it'll be fine, I can just set up on this. So then you Rapid Spin, you're faster, then you Encore them into the nasty plot, at which point they literally can't touch you at all, and you get a whole bunch of free turns if you want. Really nice. You can still run Brave Bird as really good coverage for your bad matchups versus stuff like Toad or Deerling. But Encore is just such a good idea. It's so funny. But all of this is in total to say, Wiglet's just very outclassed, to the point that it dropped to Little Cup RU. Like, that's how bad this was. Little Cup RU Kickoff Tour. And the reason why I'm making this important as a distinction is because even if we look at the Week 1 stats, it's all the way down here at number 16, and it doesn't even have a 50% win rate. That's really yikes. I had to look really hard. It was really hard finding a match where this doesn't happen, where it's just like, go Wiglet, I have my Rain team, it's gonna set up Rain Dance, and then it's dead. And that's it. And it's just like, I want this to be good so badly. because it's really cool as a Pokemon conceptually. It's like, oh look, we have Diglett, but except it's new, and it's got like this kind of cool stuff going on. But then it's just like, no, it just comes in and dies because it has no defensive utility. Even if you put the 20 base points into defense instead, it would at least be like a sort of interesting counterpart. Just like, oh, well, it can come in more liably on physical attacks because it's got a water type. It's got a water type, which means you got a lot of good resistances, and then you can just come in on some weak attacking moves, and then just be able to do your own thing, and that'd be kind of nice. But nah. The good news is that if you have it in the correct situation, it can do a lot of work. This is like a pseudo-rain team that Cacturel Sprigatito, aka Tack, is using here. And I'm just going to skip through the first few turns, because essentially all that happens is that Tack sets up Spice with Wooper, Pineco has Rapid Spin, and it blocks Rapid Spin by using Terra-type Ghost. So then just from there, you can keep on going a little bit. Skiddo comes in, Stunky comes in, and then Pineco comes in. So then this Stunky comes in and it kills the other Stunky. And now Tack is in a bit of a weird spot here because nothing really wants to come in and take another attack from this Stunky. Now, Wooper doesn't really want to come in because his Terra Ghost. Psyduck doesn't want to take it. Salandis going to take a lot from rocks, and then Bagon wouldn't really want to either. But because running Wiglet, then what you can do is that because of how fast you are, you can just Sucker Punch your return, and that's actually pretty nice. And then Contra comes in, and then Psyduck sets up Rain, Hydro Pumps, Dark Pulse, and then you think, oh, well, you know what I go to now? Well, you go to Wiglet, because it can kind of do stuff in Rain. Kind of. You know, Sucker Punch to kill the Contra, that's fine. And then Teddy Ursa comes in, so to make sure it doesn't set up, start doing annoying things, you just Liquidation, it's all A-okay. And then Bagon comes in, you're thinking, oh shoot, you're gonna get swept by Bagon, aren't you? Because you're probably just running fully physical and you're not gonna be able to hit this Bagon. Well, the good news is, you can run Bulldoze instead, and that means that you can get set up on. So, even in Little Cup Aryu, it's like, okay? Like, it can still do things, but like, promise me, if you ever try to play Little Cup Aryu, just keep it in mind that the reason why all of these Wiglets have like 37% is that it's got like no defensive utility, and although it's pretty good as an attacker, it's not fantastic. But like that's kind of how Wiglet is. It's okay in the strictest sense, but it's just so surprisingly bad. I wish it was better, but it's not. In total, they took away some of this Wiglet's special defense, gave it a significantly worse ability, and its move pool is nowhere near as deep as Diglett's, and has a lot of strict competition as a result of being a water type. So in total, Wiglet is unfortunately just a very forgettable Mon in Generation 9, despite the fact that we have a lot of cool and new additions. Thank you all very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you could like, share, and subscribe, that'd be great. And as always, have a good day.